Okay, so always be brave and try to make the world a happier place for others to live in. These were the last words Jim Corbett had said to his beloved sister Maggie. The words which summed up his life are particularly pertinent today as we face an enemy more wily and a billion odd times more microscopic than a man-eating tiger. One that pushes us to become brave hearts who prepare themselves to fight the good fight, as did the great hunter turned conservationist. Good evening all. Welcome to our April 2021 Bengal Club book discussion on Martin Booth's Carpet Sahib, A Life of Jim Corbett. I'm Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta, for those who don't know me, and on behalf of the Bengal Club Library Committee, the president of our club, Mr. S.N. Mukherjee, and the Bengal Club, I'm delighted to have so many members despite the pandemic and interested guests who are here from our city, from the nation, and as I see, have woken up early to join us across the ponds to be a part of our conversation today. At a time when conservation for the tiger, both in India, Siberia, Southeast Asia, continues to beleaguer us and pose insurmountable odds, increasing human carnivore encounters due to glorious wild creatures being robbed of their habitat and food source, egregious poaching for carnivore skin and body parts, and a general lack of legislative policy and implementation, Jim Corbett's life, lived experience and guidance seems to me a good place for us to visit at this book discussion session. Controversial though he may be, and the book might be too, Martin Booth's 265-page biography of the exceptional, compassionate man who was perhaps one of the most smartest and courageous of hunters, favored by Lady Fortune, is one of the most comprehensive and compelling biotexts on the honorary Kumayoni, Jim Corbett. There are multiple views about the efficacy of this biography, published in 1986 by the Booker Prize shortlisted prolific writer Booth. Up for interrogation today, some of our responders might convincingly argue that the biography of Corbett by D.C. Kala is far more accurate. For instance, many Corbett specialists feel Martin Booth lacks rigor in his crediting sources, especially D.C. Kala, to whom he pays no shrift at all. Although Kala had written the story of his friend Jim's life long before Booth had even started his research on the subject. We might be in for a slightly different, slightly feisty exchange of views. Also on the contentious, contested point about Jim having a relationship with his best friend, Ibbutson's wife, Jean, which is not taken well by Corbett fans. Our serious book discussants from Bengal Club, Corbett specialists, literary reviewers, my young master scholars, academics, and our distinguished guest for this evening, Dr. T.P. Singh, are sure to bring their trenchant and thought-provoking perspectives to this subject. The mandate for our book club discussion, of course, is to stick close to the unpackaging of this text. There are a few discernible positive points about Booth's biography. And I say this with Anandaroop in mind. Anandaroop, listen up. He does not write a hagiography. That's a glorified account of Corbett. He's critical of Jim's over-dramatization of his encounters of man-eating tigers or leopards. Perhaps that does not sit well with the veneration we are used to according to Corbett. Booth has included interesting appendices We selected some iconic photographs, which gives the first-time reader a fairly comprehensive view of the life of the man behind the hunter turned conservationist. Booth tells a fairly linear story, does not cause the reader anxious moments by going back and forth chronologically, and does not force the reader to try and connect dots that they may not want to or be able to. Booth does provide an occasional commentary on Corbet's colonial, post-colonial location, and infrequently assesses the hunter's slow move towards conservation. Many of you who are present here today, like me, might have read all of Corbet's portfolio, might have visited the Corbett National Park, established in 1972. My mother's extracurricular de-stressing mantra from her rigorous duties at the operating theatre was into the forest. Every year in winter, it was either Kana, Corbett National Park, Pench, the Biligiri Rangans in the Kurg area, the forest near Alwar. I will never forget the time she packed us all in with some awesome kebabs and sandwiches from Rudraprayag to Joshimath, over Nandprayag, Chamoli, and Gohna Lake, to make us retrace the footsteps of Corbett, who was hunting the man-eating leopard of Rudraprayag over the huge tracts of Tehri Garhwal. It was a winter my father, brother, our remarkably sporting driver Sitaram and I would never forget. This love of Corbettiana I owe to that remarkably adventurous woman, my mother. Let's look at a few images before I request our distinguished guest speaker, Mr. T.P. Singh, to take a few minutes to enlighten us before we launch on our journey today. So Gurudas, may we have the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Next, please. Next slide, please. There we are. So Martin Booth, born in Lancashire in 1944, died just before his 60th birthday, novelist, poet, biographer, publisher, who was shortlisted for the Booker Prize for his novel, Industry of Souls. What I find interesting about Martin Booth is that he has a cachet of work under his belt. He was a publisher of people such as James Elroy Flecker, such as Ted Hughes, Sylvia Plath, and he was a poet at large. Next one, please. So just to give you an idea how intimately and extensively he was connected to the world of publishing. Next one, please. So today, of course, up on the table is a 1986 biography of Jim Corbett, about 265 odd pages. Next one, please. That's a lot of books. And the next. Okay. So here I've tried to give you a few of the pictures which are in the book. The one at the bottom center is the house at Kaladhungi. The one just on top is the interior of the home. Quickly moving on, right bottom is Robin, his beloved dog, Brave, a great companion and a friend to Corbett. Since he was very young, he shot his first leopard at the age of 8, as most of us would know. And that on the right top hand is the museum at Kaladhungi. On the left top is Jim with some of the members of his family, including Maggie and his other brother, and down there on the left is Jim in his iconic pose. Moving on to the next slide. So the grandson of the last victim of Tallades Manita is posing here with a tiger. One of the points that I think Martin Booth does mention is the fact that Jim Corbett was very closely involved in the lives of the villagers and the farmers and the people who owned cattle. Poor as they might be, he loved them like he would love his own countrymen. And this was my India, as he always said, his India. Next one, please. So the Mukteshwar man-eater was also a tigress.
This is not the Mukteshwar man-eater.
No, this picture is not of the Mukteshwar man-eater. Absolutely right. Which one is this then, Anando?
Bachelor of Pawalgarh.
Sorry, okay, okay. In words that came from his heart, when you read the homage that Corbett paid, was the courage of little Putli, the girl who showed me the kill of the tigress of the Mukteshwar man-eater, who endeared herself to him forever. Alone, when it was twilight, she took him. She was on the road alone, herding a couple of heads of cattle. So there was that tremendous respect, the mutual respect of brotherhood, sisterhood, and "Aap mera mai baap hai" was something that the villagers told him, that he was really their protector and their father. Next, please. And this is basically Jim Corbett 101. It's for people who've not really read Corbett, some of my younger listeners today. And I am particularly enamored as a literary student of the narrative style, the rigor, the trenchant, very focused writing that we find in the man-eating leopard of Rudraprayag, who operated between 1918 and 1926. Stunning. And this is a picture of the bridge over the Alokananda River, where no one really, right, Anandarup, if I remember from my reading of Corbett, no hunter managed to sit on the towers of the bridge and get a shot at the leopard. So, you know, he was a very, very smart gentleman, the leopard who was the man-eating leopard of Rudraprayag. So this is the story which has the vignette of the woman being dragged out from under the hut in a tiny little space. And I think if you talk about the style of writing, if you talk about the paucity and the tightness of style, there is really, he's a remarkable writer of detective stories or mysteries. He has that thrall that he creates and holds the reader captive. So I think with that short overview, it might be a good idea to open the floor to give Dr. T.P. Singh a very warm welcome on behalf of the Bengal Club. He's based in Bangkok at the moment, was introduced to my husband, Dr. Harish Mehta, and I by Mr. Nirvik Majumdar years ago in Canada. Dr. Singh has more than 3 decades of work experience at senior management levels in natural resource management, administration, executive leadership, program management, research, you name it. For the past several years, he's been working with the IUCN, which, as I learned recently, is the International Union for Conservation of Nature in various capacities. In his current position as Deputy Regional Director, IUCN Asia, Dr. Singh leads a cohesive and integrated program of work in the 23 countries that comprise the IUCN Asia, as well as providing programmatic support to IUCN's Oceania office. He holds 2 master's degrees, one in botany, the other in forestry, and a PhD in botany. For the past several years, he's been working with IUCN, but he started his career with the Indian Forest Service and has served in various capacities under state and central governments. In India, he's been Vice Chancellor of Ateri School of Advanced Studies in New Delhi, a postgraduate research university, imparting education in the field of bioresource, biotechnology, energy, environment. So without further ado, TPG, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Julie. Let me start by saying that I'm not an intellectual. My only claim to being here today is because Julie very kindly invited me, and the fact that I've worked in Uttarakhand, where most of this or all of this story is about. So that's why I'm here, because I've heard the names of other people here. They know much more. They are more capable, and they can describe in much more detail and with intellectual rigor. I started my career as a forester, so I still have a mindset of a forester. There are 3 things which because I have limited time, so there are 3 things which I picked up, and I thought, let me share my perspective on those 3 things. Of course, there will be lots of others. The first, of course, was this dilemma which Jim always had between being a hunter, hunting for pleasure or trophy, or hunting for the pot, as he says, for food, or hunting man-eaters, or cattle lifters, and so on. So while in the early stages of his life, he was more of a normal shikari hunter, but gradually, of course, with time, he changed. But one thing which we need to keep in mind is that we are talking of the time when the forest estate was with the crown, and that was, I think, in 1890. The first forest policy came in 1894, written by an agriculturist, saying that forestry is basically providing land for agriculture, how to improve India's agriculture. And then the next forest policy came in 1952 after independence, which again was slightly better than the previous one, but still looked at forests as a timber resource. And the Forest Act of 1865, and then 1878, I think it was revised, and then 1927. So we are talking of that time when the legal provisions were essentially allowing these type of sports to go on, and the Britishers would come and enjoy those sports. There is also a mention of Jim's sleepy conscience. So on the one hand, he writes a very nice article saying the villagers should not shoot animals, etc. And then 4 or 5 years later, he takes the viceroy and there is tiger hunting going on. So that dilemma always has been there. But in any case, he managed to get the governor of United Provinces at that time, Mark Haley, to declare this as a national park. But also remember one thing, those days, there was some conservation. And the conservation was not for the sake of conservation, it was for restocking of the population. So if you stop fishing, for instance, the fish will restock and then you can start fishing. And the idea was you have a core area where the population breeds and then the animals, they move out, and then you have hunting blocks all around where you can shoot them. So that was the nature of those shooting in those days. But then, of course, gradually he turned into photography and so on. The second dilemma I want to speak about is his dilemma of being a domiciled European, which I think is described as a little more than a cut above an Indian laborer. And there was always this thing in his mind to prove that he's a European, he's a Pakka British national, and he loves the king and he has to work for his country and so on. And that's why you will read in many places he avoided Europeans. He would say that, he was having a drink at a bar, and when he heard the deputy commissioner say this and that, etc. So that was also playing in his mind. And he tried to move away from the stigma which was attached of his being domiciled. And finally, of course, his keen sense of observation. That is something which I really think is remarkable. The way he describes how a snake moves, if it is moving in a zigzag manner, it's a poisonous snake. snake. If it is moving fast in a single direction, it's a non-poisonous snake, and so on. And of course, this is a truly a person who's bred, who's lived near the forest, who's always stayed in the forest. Not like a person like me who's always lived in Delhi and then joins Forest Service in Uttarakhand. So, I mean, I could never have that sort of a sense of observation. But I want to share with you a few anecdotes from my time in those areas. One was I was posted in Valley of Flowers. That was my first posting in 1981. It was called Badrinath Forest Division, and it was Valley of Flowers. So Karan Prayag, Rudraprayag, these were all areas where I used to visit. And I've met a lot of people who have seen or who have met Corbett, or at least their elders have. I've also visited Kaladhungi, his home, because I was involved in some way in terms of its renovation and so on. But I was on an election duty in the hills, and there was this temple which basically there was a statue of a leopard, and I went and with my polling party, and we prayed, etc., etc. And as soon as we came out, we saw marks of a leopard. So, like an idiot, I started trailing after them. Till about 10 meters away, I heard a growl and saw a leopard which was around 10 to 15 feet away from me. And I remembered Jim at that time and raised my hand, the way he describes. But I think what saved me was the fact that the leopard was not hungry. He had probably had a kill. So, I mean, my hand didn't save me, but the fact that the tiger was fully filled, his stomach was filled. Then there is another very interesting incident, or not exactly incident. My house in Teri Garhwal was on a hill, and I had to walk 1.5 kilometers up the hill from the road every day whenever I used to come back from the office or from travel. And that was a leopard infested area. So we had a Tibetan terrier, a dog. Dog is very, they can sniff leopards. And if the dog allowed me to go, we would go. Otherwise, we will wait for the leopard to go away. And that was a ritual we had to endure for 3 years when I was there. But it was very interesting. And I also tried sipping water. You must have read, he used to sip water when he was training his troops for jungle warfare. But I mean, he's an intelligent man. I sipped water and I got typhoid. But the point is that the point that he's making was very interesting. And the fact that these things, there were no vaccines probably. I mean, I don't know. There were no vaccines at those years. So to build immunity, he would do that. And I thought that was a very interesting one. I was also very interested in terms of his description of how a tiger camouflages itself. I have been a keen photographer, but at that time when I was posted there, we had those film photographs. We were very careful in using those, not a digital photography that we have today. And I saw a leopard, a tiger in Corbett, which was drinking. And I got down from my Jeep and started photographing. And then suddenly, whoosh, up on my head, another tiger jumped from one end of the road to another end of the road. And I mean, it was just for a few seconds I saw that tiger. But I thought again, again, I'm lucky the tiger was not hungry. Finally, 2 points. You must have also read of the stone wall which he built around Choti Haldwani, his village. That that system of stone walling is still there. When we raised plantations in those areas, we still have that concept of 6 feet stone walls, which I was relating to what Corbett did so many years back. And finally, when I was in my last posting before I joined IUCN, I was chief in Dehradun, and I had an office in Dehradun and one in Nainital. And there was a man-eating tiger which had killed about 6 or 7 people at that time. But it was not just easy to ask Mr. Jim Corbett or XYZ to come and shoot. I had to go through a rigorous legal process and finally sign a death warrant with a pen. And that death warrant basically then allowed the shikaris to go and hunt that. I mean, I don't know what happened because I was transferred after that. I went with them for a couple of days, but I didn't follow up after that. Of course, the tiger was killed later on. Finally, I would like to also, you already mentioned DC Kala. There is a book by Rita Datta Gupta, and then there was a book which was brought out on the centenary of Choti Haldwani, which is also gives a very nice description of what happened. I am also a proud owner of the 1946 edition of Man Eater of Kumaon, and I am a very proud possessor of these FW Champions 2 books, which he describes with the camera in Tiger Land and the jungle in sunlight and shadow. These 2 books, you'll be surprised, I found in Bangkok. There was a book fair and I found one book, and this was a German guy. I started testing him for the other, and that was a mistake because he hiked up the price. But anyway, I got that book also. And the book, Man Eaters of Kumaon, I got from eBay. But that was also very expensive. But these are my proud possessions because of 2 reasons. One is FW Champion's daughter, who was born when Champion was there. Her son was working in the British Embassy when I was Vice Chancellor of Delhi University. And somehow he approached me from some contact because he wanted his mother to visit Dehradun to see the place where she was born and all. So actually I got these 2 books autographed by FW Champion's daughter and the grandson. So these are 2 very important possessions that I have. But with these words, I'll stop because I've just finished my 5 minutes. Thank you very much once again. And as I said, you guys know much more. I mean, I'm just an avid reader. I've read all his books and I've been following other publications on him. So that's the only knowledge I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. T.P. Singh. It's wonderful to have you with us. Brings enriched, enhanced new insight, and your personal stories full of wit as well as a little bit of anxiety. Nirvik, I'm so grateful that you put us in touch back again after all those years in Canada. Nirvik himself is based out of Bangkok, but is an avid forest traveler and has been to the Quebec National Park. We exchanged stories for many years. Nirvik, maybe a minute just to see how you inculcated the love of the forest at the Jim Corbett National Park in your daughters. Unmute, unmute, unmute.
Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Hi. So yeah, it was my father who was very interested in wildlife. You know, as children, he used to take us to the forest pretty regularly because he was in the army also. He used to get special privileges. And so, you know, Jim Corbett was, you know, I used to live in Delhi that time, and I used to, you know, Delhi air was so polluted as to whenever I used to get an opportunity as to, you know, run to Jim Corbett Park, which is 6 hours away. And fortunately, my neighbor happened to be Dr. T.P. Singh, who became the chief conservator of forest for Uttarakhand. And, you know, so he helped me a lot, you know, where I used to go to all these forest rest houses and, you know, made by the British. Some of them are so beautiful. They're out in the forest. And, you know, and Dr. T.P. Singh knows there's a place called Sitavani, you know, where I used to go there so often because, in fact, I took my father there when he was alive, and he said it's your private estate because it was away from the main forest, sort of the Jim Corbett, all the resorts and all were there. But it was so beautiful, that place, you know, on top of a hill and overlooking the river Kosi. Am I right, Dr. Singh?
Yeah.
And surrounded by mountains, you know, fully forested. It was beautiful because it was very, very bare and it was purely in nature. There was no electricity also out there. No TV and that kind of thing. So yeah, I used to go there a lot. I've seen a lot of tigers. I've made my children see tigers, my family, and you know, I was fortunate enough to do all that. You know, so I used to just that's it.
Great, Nirvik. It's nice to have that connection. I think most of us who've had that exposure during our childhood, thanks to parents or uncles who taken us to the forest, will appreciate that. Okay. So the trajectory is always the same. So we're familiar with that. Most of us have been on the book club together. 3 minutes is the time limit. Try and keep it so that I don't have to intervene, and focus, and many voices will be heard then. There's a chat box if you want to put anything. I see Karuna has already introduced herself. Dr. T.P. Singh might like to read what Karuna Singh has written. She's very interested in species evolving, in helping. She's heads an NGO, so do use the chat box, and if there are any questions, we'll come back. Okay, so without further ado, I'm calling my right hand, who always gives us a wonderful overview. We have a great lineup of speakers today. Choitali, Professor Choitali Moitro, who's a professor of English. Let's hear it from you about the biography that Martin Booth has written. Thanks, Choitali. Go ahead.
Thank you, Julie. A big thank you to Dr. Singh. Wonderful listening to him. So I've been reading this book, and while I was reading this book, a few thoughts crossed my mind. I will just share those thoughts. It's not really the literary stuff, but whatever you see in the text, what I felt was it was a very, very readable book with fresh insights of a mind whose formative years were very important, because unless you respect the formative years, especially when Jim Corbett was young, getting to know the flora and fauna of the place, sort of coming across different types of animals. Finally, you see, normally we associate Jim Corbett with killing of tigers. I think this book educates us otherwise, because it's not only the killing of tigers, it's more than that, trying to understand the man growing, and finally the chutzpah, if I should use the word, to be able to kill the fearful animals and then gradually become a visionary conservationist. I think that is important. That was very, very, the most important thing that impressed me. And what I wanted to talk about is how Martin Booth is employing his narrative technique, where he is linear and he is not trying to sort of hop back and forth when he discusses the life, and he takes us through a trajectory which helps us understand the growth of a thinking man. And the third point, which I wanted to talk about, is during the times when killing animals would automatically sort of establish a sort of power language, those decades would do so. At that time, he was able to look at killing with a different perspective. So killing, acquiring a human perspective, is something which Martin Booth is able to bring in the book. That's what I liked. And with the controversies which are always there in a sort of good biography, I'm sorry, but names like Red Comet, which is the biography of Sylvia Plath, comes to my mind. So biographies will have an edge. That is why they become interesting or uninteresting. But here, the narrative structure is very compelling. And you come to know, you sort of befriend a person who you start thinking of with new perspectives. That's what I wanted to say. I haven't crossed the time, Julie, have I? Can I make one more point?
You've been on the money very quickly.
Okay. Yes, lovely. And the same point, that he would sort of get to love the Indian scenario and kill in order to help the average Indian people who would be suffering from the geospatial area mentioned. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Choitali. A nice, compelling, positive account of your review. Lovely. Probita, Mr. Probir Dashgupta, we would love to hear your views. Please unmute.
Well, it was a very interesting read. This was actually the first book on Corbett that I personally read, and this biography was very interesting. I just have 2, 3 points to make, which I found very interesting. One is that in 1943, in a discussion with the then Viceroy Wavell, he said that there are only about 4,000 tigers in that entire area. I think it was at that point of time probably an understatement, because if it was only 4,000 in 43, I think the entire population of tigers must have been sort of decimated over the years through shoots and shikars and things like that. That's what struck me. And the book says that Corbett was out by only 500 or 1,000. Because right now in the Sundarban area, we have what, about between Bangladesh and India, about 500, maybe not 1,000. So that's one thing very interesting. Second, I found very interesting are Jim Corbett's psychic experiences and his belief in deep superstition and things like that. And I found that very interesting also. Just an observation that the thought that he had to kill a snake before he could kill a tiger, that kind of thing, it sort of permeates through. And he also had a sort of dedicated a small temple somewhere, to one of his sort of deities. And he believed in, he was involved in Hindu rituals as well. That's one thing that struck me. And other thing I found is that as what were called Anglo-Indians then, that means resident Britishers who've been there, he was third generation. And they really had a chip on the shoulders, because the ones from back home were had a chip on the shoulder against these people. The way he brought himself up from a very, very low position at Mokame, almost as an inspector of coolies, right, the first job, to the level that he had finally brought himself up to where he was, at equal terms and sort of footing with viceroys and maharajas, etc. That was another very interesting thing I found, which is worth mentioning. And finally, a little bit, because that Kumaon area is very interesting, but I come from Jamshedpur, and I was born and brought up at a time when the Chotanagpur area was a very, very densely forested area. The entire area was very, and even as late as 1976, I was in Tata Steel then. The then managing director had proposed setting up a wildlife sanctuary called the Dalma Wildlife Sanctuary, and it was all proposed. And that could, of course, not sort of take care of animals or leopards, or more elephants. But this was just before the emergency, and once the emergency came through in 1976, I think all these plans that Tatas had sort of were got into cold storage. There is a little bit of a digression, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Appreciate that, Prabita. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to call on Mrs. Anju Munshi. Anju, go ahead.
Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Good evening, everybody. This book could actually have been a very boring book for me, because I'm the one who, like at the sight of a dog and a cat and a cow gets, like scurrying away. I'm very petrified. I don't hate animals, but I'm scared, So there's a scare for even these highly docile species. So I probably would not have gone and put my hands on this book had I been, like looking for a book for myself in the library. But here, this was a kind of an opportunity, an unspoken compulsion, and I went and I saw it and I read it. And to be very honest, I also realized the fact that good writing is not, everybody knows that it's not only about writing words, it's also about, like manufacturing an environment, invoking some kind of an interest in you, which makes you go line after line after line. And by the end of it, I was actually reading about snakes and leopards, and with a lot of interest, a lot of renewed curiosity. And I finished the book. I mean, I surprised myself. So I think I graduated from a very fearful, person, very well guarded when it comes to, even the docile species that I spoke about, to talking about, the tracks of the snakes and the leopard tracks and things like that. And I also realized that this is the best way to transfer. Actually, I felt in this pandemic, I have been to a jungle. I've come back from a jungle. I have been to a very peaceful retreat. I have enjoyed myself, and I've come back to Calcutta, that kind of a thing. It really gave me an opportunity, a window to go away, from the city, enjoy the smell of the leaves, enjoy the what do I say, the aura of the jungle, and come back renewed. That is one thing. But I would also feel that after reading the book, Jim was a very friendly, he was very much, like, what do I say, helpful towards the villagers. He was a very compassionate person. For him to have been, and he was also, he had an instinctive, like compassion for the animals also. For him to strike a balance between the two must have been very difficult, to keep the people happy and safe, and to kill the leopards. I mean, this was actually like, creating an imbalance in the man-animal relationship. So, but then he went and somehow he maintained a balance between, maintaining peace, keeping the harmony of the jungle alive, and keeping the people around him happy. And very adventurous. And there are lines in between when he talks about fighting fear, which I thought was very interesting. He, as a little, and the best thing about, like, uh, the speaker before me said, is how the narrative has been about, initially about, his growing up from a young boy to an adolescent, how he handles his fears, how he handles his, after all, he is fearful and anxious when he starts with, without a rifle, without a gun. And his journey from a young adolescent to a fearless conservationist. I mean, that's a beautifully portrayed growth of his. And I think it would have been very difficult for him to maintain a balance between man, animal, environment, nature, safety. It it goes to his credit. And I've not been to Nainital, but I can visualize Sher Ka Danda. I actually feel that I'm sitting there overlooking, trying to look at all that is lying beneath me, a beautiful panoramic view that it gives you. By the end of it, I have to seriously admit and acknowledge, I loved the book. I enjoyed it. And thank you very much for introducing me to it. I'm going to read another book by the same author. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anju. That was a heartfelt appreciation. And I think, if I might, it would be nice for Mr. Vivek Krishna to pick up on where Anju has left us about the man-animal relationship and how Corbett managed to negotiate that so well, as Martin Booth points out. Right over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Judy. Well, a couple of things I just wanted to mention. First is that the book to me was okay. I won't say I was greatly enamored by Martin Booth. Because of the shortcomings of not acknowledging any of his sources, and I got the feeling that maybe he hadn't even been out to India, but I think I was wrong in that. I looked at the forward again, I find that he's quoting people that he's met in Delhi and wherever, and other places, so he must have been out to India. But that doesn't come through that is the first person account as far as he's concerned. The most compelling parts of his biography were the quotations from Corbett's work himself, his own Corbett's writing. So I thought that was the part that really got me. And being a long-term Corbett fan, and having spent a lot of time in the areas that he spoke of and written of in Kumaon and in Garhwal for that matter. I've walked there, I've trekked there, I've been to all the hill stations in North India when growing up. And as youngsters in the 60s and 70s, I would say 60s really, shooting was, anybody could go out and do it if you had access to a gun. And I remember going out and shooting ducks at Najafgarh in Delhi, which now it's an overgrown township, and that beautiful lake that was there completely disappeared now. I used to, in fact, shoot on the way to the airport. There were, on either side you could get pigeon and all, and now to think of it, I mean, if you put out a gun there, you'll be immediately put under, I think. So, but looking at the whole joy of Corbett was the fact that his connection to Kumaon and his he said that he's an honorary Kumaoni. No, he's not an honorary. He was actually a Kumaoni. He was born there. He associated himself very closely with it. With a great deal of reluctance, he left India to go to Africa because he thought that he would become a sort of second-class citizen, which I don't think would ever have been the case. He was known as a Gora Sadhu as far as the Kumaunis are concerned. My Bap, certainly, since he owned property and he looked after his people as his own. His ownership of the animals that he was so familiar with was because he thought they belonged to him. He objected to people coming and shooting in his blocks because he said, "These are my animals. Didn't take my permission?" And that was a complete ownership as far as he was concerned. It's not that he was asking for money that you'll give me 100 rupees and you can go and shoot a tiger. But he didn't like the idea of anybody going in there and stamping on his territory. So I think what he learned as a child growing up in Nainital and Kaladungi, and that stood him in such great stead later in his life. And reading Martin Booth's book was the first time I've read a biography of it. I've read D.C. Kala's book subsequently, but what he went through in growing up here, he was a railway clerk for so long. He was as rightly pointed out, he was a labor overseer. If you put it absolutely crudely, he managed because of his the magnetism he had with his people. He had so much affection for people. It wasn't just Kumaunis, but anybody who worked with him. That there was no union ever formed in and around Mukama Ghat, where he worked for 20 years. And at the same time, being able to connect with Nainital every year, going home on leave. And the business of man-eaters and tigers and leopards, both of them, was to correct that imbalance. As he clearly points out, the reason man-eaters come up is because you've shot everything in sight. There's nothing left for them to eat, and then they're going to turn to you if there's nothing left to say. Can't really blame them at all. The other really interesting point, which is I think very topical as far as just comes in as a line towards the end. He said, "What causes tigers and leopards to become man-eaters?" And he said, well, for one, it was an outbreak of cholera, where so many people died that they were throwing corpses over the hillside. And the second was a strange fever that came up in 1918, which they called the war fever. As it turned out, that was the big Spanish flu. And that's what we are seeing today as we are living through another strange fever that's enveloping all of us. Luckily, we are being thrown on the road, as you can see, in hospitals and in towns and villages all across the country. So yeah, it's topical and very much there. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Vivek. As usual, you bring in a breath of fresh air in your analysis, and I think we've all enjoyed that. Could we please now have Professor Atish Mitra from Montana? Is he here? Atish, are you here? I think we are missing him today. All right. Sangeeta, go right ahead. Unmute Sangeeta, please. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Well, I personally have been, I've grown up in the jungles of Assam, and I've been to Kanha and Ranthambore. I've been to Nainital several times, but for some reason, Jim Corbett's park still remains on my bucket list. Well, as far as Jim, we've always known of Jim Corbett as the Tiger Man, as the hunter of man-eaters, but what I really enjoyed about this book is the different dimensions of Corbett's life, which I never knew about. And I think that is what really caught my interest. As the lady said, I've forgotten the professor, Shubhra, I think that his childhood made so much of what he became. But what was very interesting was his psychological construction by virtue of the fact that he was a domicile. You see, they were never privileged people. They were really in the marginal thing of society. They never had the glamorous life of the expats, but they were white. But they were white. And to that extent, they did command some respect from the Indian population. And therefore, Mokame Ghat, where he was posted in that punishment posting, the whole objective was to get him to leave that posting, actually was a very formative part of his life. And I think he was so successful simply because A, he could completely relate to the Indians, he loved them, he knew the local language, he knew Hindustani, he knew dialects of Kumaon, and also he was a white. Otherwise, how else would a man who was only some 19 or 20 years old take over the responsibility that he did of commanding so many local people? So I think that, and he also had a very high sense of responsibility, which sort of went further after he lost his younger brother or elder brother Archie, and he knew that he had to be the breadwinner. So he loved hunting. He shot his first tiger when he was 8. And if he really wanted to follow his heart and his path, he would have remained in Nainital, in Kaladungi, and not really taken up a job. But his economic compulsions and his sense of responsibility made him live in a place as dry and horrible as Mokame Ghat for like 15 years or 20 years of his life. So that was something which I never knew about, and I never realized the kind of resilience and grit that he had. And this domicile thing is a very dominant part of the book. I think they're like the crossover people between the expats and the Indians, and I think that was his biggest strength. Although it was an inferiority with which he was born, it actually became his strength and his foundation for what he ultimately became. Because from then he was able to become an entrepreneur, and there's so many facets to his life which I never knew about, apart from the hunting and the jungles, that he was such a successful entrepreneur, how he invested in property and sort of expanded what his mother had started, which was having these houses which they gave out on Airbnb. And then he became a partner of an engineering company. And then he invested in Africa. He even bought a tea garden, which really interested me. So he was really a very a man for all seasons. He was kind. He was reticent. He always was at the edge of any social gathering, because I think it was also an insight complex that he had being a domicile, but also because of his inherent nature.
Thank you, Sangeeta.
I really like the story from that point of view. And of course, he was a complete patriot. He served the army, and he was decorated. And I think the final sort of feather in his cap was he was able to spend time with the Queen and the King, being a patriot. So that was a nice end to the story.
Thank you, Sangeeta. That was comprehensive, lot of material there. And I just want to quickly pick up on that idea of the domicile, the idea of his identity. I think that, like Kipling's Kim, who was writing at a time which was crossing over with Jim Corbett's life, I think Kipling, E.M. Foster, all these people were in that hybrid space where they loved India and yet they belonged to Britain. So, point well made and well taken. Perhaps Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, I saw Paramita here. Are you here, dear? Yes. After you, I'll let the floor out to Mr. Anandaroop Banerjee to just give us his response. And then we will move on to our guest participants. So go ahead, Paramita, 3 minutes. Unmute, dear, unmute.
Yes, sorry. So sorry. Thank you, Julie Di. I really liked what Choitali Di said today. I'm very much with her. It is a complete development of a thinking man, like from a tiger killer to a conservationist. I just loved the fact that the development was beautiful, and it's a beautiful narrative. It's like an illustration, and initially it's like a historical novel. You're going through details of history, and I loved that. And I think it opened up, and I was so much in. I had been to Kumaun when I was very young, at a very impressionable age. So I was very fond of Jim Corbett, always had read his books and all. And then here I came to know the man behind the myth. So it was a wonderful window which opened up. It was a wonderful read. Thank you, Julie Dee. Julie Dee, unmute yourself.
Mr. Anandarup Banerjee, looking forward to your response. Unmute, please. Great.
Is it okay now? Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Now, so far, I am completely with the group that this is a very well-written book. Now, somebody who writes books writes for a living would come up with something like this. I have no doubt it's very well written. My problem with the book lies elsewhere. Now, having grown up on a, oh my God. Sorry, that was my son calling from America. Okay, now having grown up on a diet of stories about Jim Corbett, other hunters, I have had people in my family who have shot man-eaters, and having been to the jungles as long as I can remember, and I still do go to the jungles, I wonder why a person who has read all of Jim Corbett would read this book. If somebody has not read Jim Corbett, this book will provide some kind of an input about, okay, there was somebody called Jim Corbett who was very good, who was a conservationist, who was a hunter, who was a conservationist, who shot some man-eaters, and later on a park was named after him. Now, this book reproduces a lot of insights on his growing up and all that is there in Kala's book. And there are some embellishments, as I call it. One of them you referred to, Judy, in terms of, I would say a little bit of spice about his relationship with Jean Ibbotson, which, I'll just put it to the group. One example of how ridiculous it is. Love letters were exchanged between the two, were sent by Jean in the hands of other members of the staff. My friends, today Nainital is 8 hours by car to Pauri. I rest my case over there. Okay. Then there is another reference of one lady called Helen. Again, completely unsubstantiated and completely, and there's not, why was this necessary? Why is Helen and a relationship with Jean Ibbotson necessary? So this is what causes an irritation within me as a Corbett lover, and having grown up and having so much inputs on Corbett. Now, if I have to carry on being contrary, he quotes somewhere, and which is there in Kala's book also, and he expands on that. In a letter to Maggie, he had said that when he goes to take photographs of tigers, he is completely unarmed. Now, Booth poo-poos that idea that this is something ridiculous. Obviously, he has no clue about jungles, and he has no clue about who goes into the jungle and how. Now, anybody who's, Dr. Singh, or anybody who goes into the jungles or knows about jungles will know that all forest guards everywhere, even the great Billy Arjun Singh, whom I had a chance to meet and talk about Corbett, he moved about the jungle with a stick because and as Corbett says, nobody will harm you. So, okay, having said that, again, I don't want to get into the qualitative aspects of writing, which is very nice. But then my question is, why did he suddenly decide from this is not the kind of books he writes. Now, why did he decide to write a book about Corbett? And that too, in my view, a half-baked one with information which is unsubstantiated and unverifiable. So this is what has caused a bit of irritation in me, and I've been telling you. This is all that I have. By the way, Julie, I have forwarded you a clip today which came where I mean, Jim Corbett to me is one of the ultimate in descriptive English. If you read The Queen of the Village, right? The Queen of the Village is in the clip I sent you today.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'll share it with the book club before our next book meeting. Anando, you have literally thrown so much light that a lot of us will be thinking about your points, and points well made. What troubles me about Martin Booth is that he does not pay any credit to DC Color, and he has taken a lot from DC Color. And as you point out, Anando, I don't know why he wanted to write this biography with these little irritants in them. Otherwise, he's a good writer, you know. So
that's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All righty. Let's open it up. We'll start with our guest, Dr. Rama Bhattacharya, served in the United Nations from Oxford University and is very brave, a brave heart today to be here. She lost her mother a couple of days ago. Thank you, Rama, for the support.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julie Di. Good evening. I just lost my beloved mother, born Mondira Ganguly. I would like to thank Bengal Club and Julie Di for allowing me to grieve by reading Carpet Sahib. The Gangulys moved to Uttar Pradesh in the 1850s as they were emancipated zamindars and stood up against orthodoxy in Bengal, just like the Tagores, and had to flee social ostracism as they had become Christians. They lived in the same milieu as Corbett. So first, I would like to acknowledge that in terms of it being, the book being a wonderful read for me, vivid details and the chronicling of life in the Himalayas and the Terai. The book takes us straight to an almost first-hand account. I felt I was inhabiting that milieu from the middle 19th century. I enjoyed every mountain track, glade, wild plum, shikar hunting treks, and the world of an elaborate administration of naibs and tehsildars. The magic of Mussoorie, where my mother moved for 6 months. From her, I've heard the tales of the viceregal lodge, the shikars, except, however, that was the time when India was dominated by empire and we were the subalterns. I could relate to that milieu in this book, Carpet Sahib, in toto. I totally understand that many readers will feel uncomfortable at the colonial overtones, but I want to leave you with 2 questions tonight of how I think the book interrogates received thinking. First of all, I would like to highlight a point about primary education. For me, what was very interesting and a kind of interrogation, if you like, of the kind of people we are, at least I've climbed only Otis elevators, that Corbett's education is from primary sources, directly from nature, with no mediation by books, not sent to a formal school till 10 years old, and learning from the instincts of animals and becoming conversant. He almost inhabits the world of the animals and their language and their instincts. I think if you take a step back from the immediacy of the story, this book reverses the separation from our more instinctual self as human beings, the separation that has been caused by post-Enlightenment Europe. And I think that this book brings, for a second for me, the importance of the instinctual life that we have completely lost. Both, the second point I want to leave you with is both Corbett and Booth are colonial children. I think several people, Choitali Di, Sangeeta Kichlu, and Julie Di, and many others have mentioned this hybrid quality. But I have a slightly different take on that. I feel both Corbett and Booth are colonial children whose sense of identity is fraught. They are neither British nor Indian. And they connect through their childhood, but in the process, and this is really a philosophical point, they create a vivid alternative universe where nature speaks. And they valorize the Himalayan forests and wildlife, etc. But in my view, perhaps the book is neither a colonial read nor a post-colonial read, but in a different genre, something that post-colonial experts like Professor Julie Banerjee might wish to explore, where the sense of being is obviously not Indian, obviously not British. I mean, it is poignant how much he misses India when he in his last stages in Africa, and the sense of home. Where is home? Normally in post-colonial literature, home moves, home is mobile. But I think this is a third category of human beings who are not, people of subaltern worlds who move to other countries, but they kind of belong to neither. I don't think they have the sense of home that even the post-colonials have, even if they live all over the world. I think they kind of are on a no man's land, people like Corbett. And I think that raises a very interesting question. And finally, I just want to leave you with the thought that there's definitely through the jungles and the forests that my mother lived in and loved, there's an interrogation of our urban way of life, which we assume to be superior, where we are losing touch with nature and our own natural human self, and possibly finally losing touch with what really matters. Thank you so much to all of you.
Roma, you've actually planted a totally new perspective in me. There's one line which you mentioned about how Corbett is actually finding an identity through his negotiation of relationships with nature.
Absolutely.
And that is remarkable, because I don't think in our post-colonial, postmodern, or diasporic studies of home and identity and belonging, we've ever conceptualized that there is a third order.
Exactly.
So thank you for that. I mean, I, for one, I'm blown away by that idea, and we'll mull over that and we'll talk about it another time. So wonderful.
Thank you so much.
As usual. Sana, are you ready to go all the way from Toronto? Sana?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Julie, for the opportunity to give a response on this biography. Like many people mentioned, this is not a biography I would have typically read or picked up by myself, which opened my eyes to the importance of reading about different subjects and themes like conservation and hunting. Throughout the biography, I found the man-eater expeditions very thrilling to read about, which I was surprised that I enjoyed. So as I read the last few pages of the biography, I realized that one of my favorite episodes from The Crown, called Hyde Park Corner, in season 1 beautifully depicts the meeting between Jim Corbett, Queen Elizabeth, and the Duke of Edinburgh in Kenya. So this is the part about the treetops. So this is a particularly important scene in the series, as it's the moment when Princess Elizabeth becomes Queen Elizabeth, as Jim Corbett describes in his own writings and Martin Booth draws our attention to. So I urge all of you to see this episode from The Crown if you're interested in seeing how Jim Corbett has been recently depicted, especially in a very popular show on Netflix. So in this regard, I realized through my reading of this biography the historical impact of Jim Corbett, someone who I had not previously heard about, nor his work. So it was a very fascinating read for me. What was particularly fascinating for me was Corbett's family history, what drew them to India, and the experiences of identity and belonging that Corbett felt as someone who was proficient in local languages and was also a third-generation Indian. I found particularly interesting the instances when he travels to London and always manages to get lost on his way. I found that to be very humorous. And finally, Martin Booth did a very good job, in my opinion, of juxtaposing Courbet's own accounts of his expeditions in the jungle versus what Courbet and those around him first observed. I think that the biographer did a good job of exploring embellishments, as he called them, and other details, which is an important task for any good biographer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sana. Always on the money. And that's a new perspective again for all of us. That incident episode of The Crown that you talk about. I find it actually quite interesting if we can open it up for a short discussion after Ayushi and Shibonti have spoken. The African component, and I never really could put my head around it. Maybe somebody will have an answer, maybe Vivek, Anando, Roop, Roma, anybody, as to why he might have chosen to go to Africa. He had no history there. He didn't know anybody really there. So why would he choose to leave my India and go and die in a place where he had no familial ties? That must have been very hard. And it was not for a short time. He was ill for a long time, 3,000 feet high in that little town.
Can I come in with something?
Yes, Harish, in 2 minutes, if you give me 2 minutes, we'll just finish Ayushi and Shibonti's presentation.
Okay.
We've done well with time today. I was going to ask you anyway, Hari. Okay, so Ayushi, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for this opportunity, and good evening to everybody here. So, Jim Corbett, as we all know, was a legendary hunter turned conservationist of nature. But what is most interesting about this biography by Martin Booth is that Booth presents to us the man in its entirety. His other personalities that has often been overshadowed by his fame as a hunter is accounted for in this book. Jean was born and raised in a typical European family who had settled in Nainital. It was from an Indian servant that he learned the Kumaini dialect along with his mother tongue. It was their companionship that helped him understand the culture of the Indian people. Since his childhood, he had blooming in himself the attributes of an explorer. He would wander off at the slightest opportunity to his backyard and to the nearby jungles that he would get. But Jim was introduced formally to guns by his brother Tom, and to the firearm that was given to him by Stephen Dees, he was shot his first leopard and martini, which probably added to his experience in becoming a prolific hunter in a few years. However, he couldn't continue with hunting in his youth, and because he had to take on family responsibilities, and so he had to settle for a job in the railways. Hunting obviously was then at a sideline, and he only hunted for food. Now, in this entire years that he spent as a railway worker, he had several incidents which made him the man that he was. It taught him, it broke him, and probably added to his vast arena of experiences. Now, he was also very patriotic towards Britain and wanted to be a part of the Boer War. However, refrained from doing so, mostly due to the responsibilities towards his family because he was the primary bread earner. It was, however, during the First World War that he got the opportunity to display his patriotism because of a shortage of manpower. When he finally sailed from Bombay, he, however, had a dual feeling inside him because India has always been his home. He has been born here, he has been raised here. However, he was going to this other country, which was apparently his motherland, to fight off against the enemies. However, he did answer his call to and went off to not show his patriotism towards Britain. When he came back, he wanted to focus on his career as the railways, but again, instead he was sent off to fight the Afghans. Once he acquired Matthew's town hardware store and estate proprietorship, a few years later, his business was steady. He could finally focus on what he always desired to do, hunting. And by this time, he was also a best-selling writer. He was starting to write, and he became a best-selling author. And some of his thrilling stories, which instantly give us goosebumps, we have all read. So on one of these hunting trips to Africa, it first occurred to this voracious hunter that maybe it is time that nature needs a conservation. And once when he was struck with this idea, he never looked back. He employed every power that he had to teach and educate the people how important it was, how necessary it was for conservation of the nature. And however, he couldn't spend his last years in India. He went off to this, as the speakers before me mentioned, that he went off to this foreign land and he died there. So finally, to sum up, Jim Corbett was a man who was loved by all Indians, particularly the peoples of Humayun. He was a successful businessman, a true patriot, and above all, he loved and defended India with all his heart. And I think Blunt here did a wonderful job, as I said earlier. He introduced us to the man. He brought us closer to the man Jim Corbett with all his ability. And truly, it was a wonderful read. And I myself am a Corbett fan, and I think I have got to learn more about him through this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayushi. Well done. That would make a wonderful viva for your master's finals. Excellent. I'm so proud of you. Shivonti, our very own librarian, as I say always, keeps us all on our toes with all her knowledge and her help. For 20 years nearly, curating the library at the Bengal Club. Go ahead, Shivonti. Looking forward.
Good evening, everyone. I got introduced to Jim Corbett's works at the age of 17, I believe, when I was a student of Standard 11 through the Baniters of Humayun. Jim Corbett, born in 1875, was at one with the jungles, an expert hunter, killing his first leopard at the age of 8. Doesn't it sound incredible? Although tigers were his most sought after prey, but he gradually turned himself into a conservationist. Martin Booth's book is a story of a typical domiciled Englishman in India who had been not only in love with wildlife, but also in love with the people of India. From this perspective, if I may, I would like to compare Corbett with a very well-known, our own Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's work, Aranyak, where he also has meticulously discussed about ecological aspects of this country. And I believe only an author like Corbett can write. A tiger is a large-hearted gentleman with boundless courage. When he is exterminated, as exterminated he will be unless public opinion rallies to his support. India will be poorer by having lost the finest of her fauna. How true his words are today. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Shibonti. That pretty much wraps up our adoration for nature and for wildlife. The tiger as a large-hearted gentleman. Harish, please go right ahead.
Thank you, Julie. My very brief observation has to do nothing with tigers or hunting or anything, but with biography, the genre of the biography. Biography, as opposed to autobiography, allows for a more critical understanding of a personality which might otherwise, in the hands of the subject, become glorified to no end. You know, for example, any of us writing a book about our own lives are unlikely to include some of the senior aspects of what we've been up to. You know, some of the more unappetizing things that we might have been up to in our youths and otherwise. I don't even recall Winston Churchill's own works meeting those standards of frankness. And therefore, the whole business of biography is a way by which some of the things that somebody would like suppressed will come out. And there will be people saying that this never happened. This could never have happened. Obviously, the same thing is about Gandhi. The things being said about him never happened. None of that stuff ever happened. How could it? Because he was Gandhi. So when there's a tendency of hero worship within the public and the public mind, it comes with a reluctance to admit what they consider an inadmissible atrocity. A breach of faith, a breach of facts, unattributed material, some stuff is pulled out of nowhere. But that's what biography is. And if one were to accuse Booth of missing a footnote here or there, that's not the point. He might have done so, but he's not an academic. So we can't impose stuff on, we can't tell Booth how he should have written his book. And this is a problem I have with a lot of book reviewers, and especially academic books. They begin to hector and lecture the chap who spent 10 years writing it on the kind of book the reviewer would have written. Then go ahead and write it. You see what I'm saying? That biography in itself is a challenge to the halo that it shatters some of that halo, and that's what the biography is about. That's the business of biography, to break the halo of hagiography.
Excellent point, Harish.
I rest my case there.
Okay, let's open it up. This is what I was hoping we would get to. Yes, Anandu first, then Dr. Paramita, and then I'd like Vivek to comment. And Choitali, I hope you're still here. So Anandaroop, go ahead.
I'd like to comment too. Thanks.
Okay.
A biography is somebody written by somebody who's detached, but that certainly does not give him or her the license to write, unadulterated trash and fiction. You're most welcome to give some anecdotes. You're most welcome to give something which has even remotely been suggested by somebody else. We talked about Gandhi. There are enough things about, quote unquote, which are unsavory about Gandhi, which are written by multiple people. This is not the right comparison.
Okay.
Second, just one more point. You wanted to know about why Corbett left India. The answer is in chapter 12 of Mr. Kala's book.
Yes, okay. Will you, okay. So Anandu, I will consult with you on this. This has stuck in my mind for many years, but we'll come back to it. Harish, you've really opened a Pandora's box. Hold your horses, Harish. Let each person have a say and respond, and then you can have the final word. So Paramita, go ahead. Then Roma, Vivek, and anybody else who wants to jump in. Roma, Paramita, go ahead.
I second Professor Mehta. Yes, biography will bring out many things which we do not want to hear. So I second him.
Okay, thank you. Who will go next? Choitali, please.
Always second what Professor Mehta said. I feel the same as I pointed out about Red Comet, and I can name other books. Well, whatever you have in your mind about the person you're reading might be shattered, but that's not the point. That is what biography is about. It shows perspectives. I think the same.
Thank you. Vivek?
Sorry. Yeah, I would just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I don't think he runs down Corbett at all. He doesn't glorify him either. So, but my point about the autobiography was that it was mundane. That's what I thought Martin Booth was. I don't think he was a great biographer on a subject where he he's just quoting other people and not acknowledging them. And therefore, it's not really a view that he's putting across himself. Second thing was something you mentioned, Julie, was about why did he go to Africa? Well, he had investments in Africa for 10 years before he went there. And they were close friends of his, they're family members of his. There were the Nestors were there, and Tom Corbett was there.
Tom was there,
and he moved across. So there was family, and always the feeling that the history of 1857, where relatives died, his uncle was killed there, burnt alive in the siege of Delhi. So, that had not gone 100 years later. There was still that fear, and all the troubles that took place leading up to partition must have been enough of a ferment in his mind that they're not going to be really having a good time in India, not what the India he knew.
Yes, and Vivek, you make a lot of sense, but I still remember that line where he tells Maggie, you have to live somewhere, when Maggie tells him, let's go back.
Yeah.
And he says, well, you have to live somewhere, and everywhere has a problem. So yeah, those family issues are very important. Roma, go ahead. Roma, you were going to reply to Harish.
No, actually, I'm going to reply to your question, why Africa?
Okay, great.
You asked me why Africa, and I want to build on the two aspects I've been trying to talk about. One is Corbett's exploring the flora, fauna, the Himalayas, and the instinctual world, the animal world, as a sort of separate language and discourse from people who go for holidays to the hills and come back. He was living almost living in the Himalayas at an instinctual level, hearing every scent of the animals, being able to make sounds like the animals, combined with the other point I was making about the normal categories of post-coloniality, which don't really fit Corbett. So my sense is, I want to just put that thought out there, that really he may have loved London and been excited by the Buckingham Palace, but how could he, after living in the Himalayan jungles, survive in England? Africa gave him, for political reasons, he couldn't stay in India. I'm sure he didn't leave by choice. I'm sure he left, stealthily by night with a lot of anguish in his soul. His lived life there. And Africa, in their minds, may have also been, because he used to go for shikars there before, as a sort of mirror image of something which was neither England nor India, but something closer to his soul. But the anguish is very apparent, where even when he's old and not so strong, he's dying to come back to India.
Yes, exactly, Roma.
That's my point, that the home is very problematic for Corbett. It's much more complex than post-colonial literature has so far explored. That's my
he becomes a diasporic without roots.
Exactly.
So he's a seed flying in the wind, Paromita. You know what I mean? Much of your poetry is about that. Yes, Harish? And then I want to just turn to Sana for the last word. Harish, go ahead.
Well, yes, I wanted to end on a very funny and a happy note. And that is that, many years ago, when I was a reporter for a newspaper in Bombay, I'm talking about the 1980s, I had the good fortune of interviewing the theatre critic of the venerable New Statesman. His name was Benedict Nightingale. And this was the New Statesman in its heydays, and not the current form it is in. In the 80s, the New Statesman was something you had to read every Saturday when it arrived in Bombay. And you went to Thacker's bookshop on Kara Gora after your lunch of pomfret and everything else and Tata sauce at the Wayside Inn. And you bought it, I think, for 50 rupees in those days. Anyway. So when I was interviewing Benedict Nightingale, he told me that as theatre critic, he had reviewed one of John Osborne's plays. I forget which play it was. Was it Look Back in Anger or the other one? But when Osborne read the review in the New Statesman, he chased after Benedict Nightingale, caught him outside the National Theatre, and actually gave him a black eye. He beat the beat Jesus out of the chap who threatened, who tore his. Well, he didn't tear the play to pieces. He tore a production of the play in which Osborne was heavily involved and invested. So that's it. I mean, that's all I have to say about the way people who write about famous people, the way they might get treated.
Lovely story to end. Sana, last word.
I agree with what's been mentioned by Roma about Corbett being a diasporic person. I found it interesting because towards the end, I thought that he would return to England, but I was surprised that he did choose to go to Kenya. And as others mentioned, I think it was because he had family connections there and business interests as well.
Yeah, yeah. So we've had a really feisty discussion. Vivek and Sangeeta, Roma, Harish, Paromita, Ayushi, all of you, Choitali, who have been with us since the beginning of the book club. This was a different kind of a discussion, would you say?
Yeah.
Quite enjoyable. And thank you for stirring up the hornet's nest, Harish, which you do so well. Brought out a lot of discourse and different opinions. Shebonti, thank you again. Dr. T.P. Singh, is he still here or not? He opened the floor. And Ritu is here, Ritu Gulati from London. Have you been hearing us, Ritu? Unmute, unmute.
I enjoy this book club immensely. Whenever I get a chance, I know it's about 3 p.m. here, and I sort of got away from work, but they're so interesting, and what a wonderful diaspora of people, and very wonderful. I really, really enjoy that. Thank you for making me a part of it.
Thank you. I must say, Mr. McLaren is here from British Columbia. Very grateful that you could make it. It must be very early in the morning.
I know it's 6:30 here.
Good Lord.
You can imagine my dedication to be with you all.
Absolutely. We are all very, very touched. Thank you so much, Mr. McLaren. You were a member since which year at the Bengal Club, sir?
I think I probably joined Bengal Club 1970.
70, yes, yes. So I believe. So I believe. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Nirvik, for putting me in touch with Dr. T.P. Singh. Thank you, everybody, for waking up from all across the ponds. And Sana, for your insights. Ayushi, wonderful job. And of course, Mrs. Sujata Goswami, Karuna Singh, all of you. And Anandarup, you've done a sterling job. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Next
Thank
one,
you, ma'am. Thank you.
Next one is the 29th of May. I will let you know.
Bye-bye. Stay safe, all of you.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay
Bye.
happy. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Julie D.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Julie. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye, Roma. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.